The corrections head has contradicted statements made by senior government ministers in Parliament that a contract for the public-private partnership to build the new Waikeria prison was already in place when the government came to power. Ray Smith told MPs today while there were a number of agreements with the consortium the national government had been working with, the signing of the formal contract was still some months away. The coalition government has been under pressure to explain why it has proceeded with a $750 million PPP after Labor MPs have vocally opposed using the private sector to build anything other than transport infrastructure. Last month there was this exchange in the House between Nationals' Amy Adams and Ministers David Clark and Andrew Little.
Does the Minister agree with Jacinda Ardern when she said that PPPs and corrections just don't work, and on that we've been very clear, and Phil Twyford, who said that PPPs for prisons would be a no-go for this government?
Mr Speaker, there is clear evidence around the government's prior experimentation with PPPs that they did not work. There are a number of perverse outcomes, and this government has steered clear thus far of any such foolishness.
Entry. So why is a PPP now being used to fund Waikeria prison when the use of PPPs for prisons has been clearly and repeatedly ruled out? Once Andrew tells you the answer.
Well, I don't have the detail on that in front of me, but I understand they sold the contract. They signed the contract and it cost $34 million.
So that from the House, our political editor Jane Patterson asked Ray Smith at what point the new government had to make the decision whether to proceed with or ditch the PPP.
Well, I think Waikeria has been pretty well canvassed over a good 6 months. So I think there's been a wide-ranging discussion about the nature of the prison and kind of the size of the prison and the dimensions of it. And so I think those other considerations are really ones for the government, not for me. My job was to provide the government with the best advice I could on how they could proceed.
So I'm not going to ask you to make any declaration on Andrew Little's comments, but where did the $34 million figure come from if the PPP agreements that were already in place had been ceased?
Oh, well, look, I think you'd need to talk to others about the comments they make. It's not really fair to ask me about that. But the reality is that when you're in a big development like this, with lots of people working on it, you accumulate a large amount of costs as the project proceeds, and everybody understands that. So particularly once you indicate that you're likely to proceed with the preferred bidder, and people are busy working on designs, and remember, people working on designs and rethinking the size of the prison and so on. So a lot of people are expending a lot of resources on the way through. So it's at some point. Fortunately the project's gone ahead and looks in really good shape, and we're really confident about it. If the project had been cancelled altogether, there would have been a cost associated with that, but we're not in that position.
So did you have an assessment of that? Was there a point at which Correction said, right, we either go ahead with the arrangements in place looking towards a contract or we scrap it?
Oh, well, I think lots of assessments are made all the way along. I don't recall the exact ones, but all the way along when you're doing this, at any time when you're involved in a large commercial contract for a building contract such as this, you're always in negotiation and thinking about ways forward or whether plans will progress, and all parties that are involved in it know that. And all parties. There
was not one specific point where it was like, right, we have to make a decision given the new government.
Well,
we proceed or we break.
Look, all the way along, and right from the time. Actually, it was one of the early things the government had to pick up and talked about, and were quite open about the fact they wanted to kind of rethink it and consider it. And I think it's been a really good process. It's taken about 6 months. So all the way along, we're just considering the options and what they might be, and so are all of the parties that are involved in it.
Does $34 million sound about right to you?
Well, look, I'm not sure of the exact numbers in terms of what might have been committed in terms of resource, but these are very big and expensive projects, and the most important part about all of that is that as we're proceeding with the contract, all of the costs are rolled into kind of the design work that's been done to date, so we're really pleased about that.
Would it be fair to say, though, that the contract, so the agreement was at such a stage, you were so far into it, that there would have been significant repercussions if the decision had been made to forego the PPP?
Well, look, there's risks for all of the parties involved when you're a long way into an arrangement like that. So they didn't materialise. So the reality is we have proceeded and we are getting close to having a contract, but we don't quite have one yet. There's a little ways to go yet.
That is Ray Smith, of course, Head of Corrections, talking to our political editor, Jane Patterson. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, says he's not going to argue over semantics in relation to his comments in the House, saying there were signed agreements in place with the consortium, and he was advised the cost of breaking those agreements, along with the money that had already been spent, totalled up to $34 million.